Hi, everyone. This is Eric Brodell from PeopleForBikes. I am our Business and Political Engagement Manager, and I'm joined by Morgan Lomley and Patrick from Cheyenne, Wyoming. We'll be talking about how the latest e-bike bills are going to affect your business and how e-bike bills in general affect your business as a bicycle retailer, supplier, and beyond. So for the agenda today, we'll be talking for a quick 20 minutes, and then we'll have 10 minutes available for Q&A at the end. We're going to go through our 2019 progress on our e-bike laws. We'll have Patrick talk a little bit about his involvement through Bicycle Station, passing an e-bike law in Wyoming. We'll look towards the future with our 2020 plans and then tell you all how to get more involved in e-bike legislation in your home state. So with that, I will pass it off to Morgan and we'll get started.
Hi, everyone, and thanks, Eric. This is always one of my favorite topics. We at PeopleForBikes have been in business for about 20 years, looking at how to make bicycling more accessible to more people, and e-bikes are a natural extension of that. So if you've attended one of our webinars in the past, thank you. And about a year ago, we actually did a similar webinar in August or the fall, I want to say, about how to use your voice as a business owner or business manager, anyone connected to the bike business, to advocate for better e-bike access in your city, county, or state. And that's how we came to know Patrick Collins, who you'll hear from in just a few minutes, about how we were able to partner, PeopleForBikes and with the bike retailers out there to advance better e-bike laws state by state. So I'm really looking forward to having Patrick on the webinar to share his story. And like I said, or like Eric said, my name is Morgan Lomley. I'm the Director of State and Local Policy here at PeopleForBikes. Been here for about 5 years, and I always kind of joke that 5 years ago I really didn't know what an e-bike was or not, and now I'm an avid daily e-bike commuter. So it's been a wonderful addition to my fleet of bikes, and I use my e-bike for transportation around our hometown of Boulder. So really hope to carry that joy into other people's lives. And one way we can do that is through common sense e-bike policies and legislation. So just going to give a quick overview of e-bike policies and then talk a lot about what we've been able to accomplish in the last 4 to 5 years, how we can use your voice as a business operator to further that progress, and then what we're planning on doing in 2020 and how you can be involved. So quickly, e-bikes, there are a lot of rumors around town and around the country that because e-bikes are regulated at the federal level for the purposes of product safety and manufacturing, as a bicycle, that you can use them anywhere you want. That's not accurate. For the purpose of use, states really define in their state vehicle codes and traffic laws where you can ride an e-bike. And so that's been our focus, because only about, I would say 30 to 35 states, depending on how you quantify it, define e-bikes as bicycles. And what that means is if you have an e-bike, you can ride anywhere a bicycle is allowed to ride for the purpose of the bike path and on roads. I'll clarify that electric mountain bike access is a much different topic, and we won't cover that in much detail today. But what we want to do is make sure that when people ride their bike, their e-bike, they're able to have the same rights of the road and kind of the duties of a traditional bicycle rider. And so that what that does is, if you're thinking about it from a business lens, is if someone comes into the bike shop and says, where can I ride this e-bike? If you're in a state that has a really bad e-bike law on the books, there's really no legal standing for an e-bike rider. And the answer to that question is, well, technically it's illegal to ride your e-bike in the state. And that's certainly not an answer you would probably give someone on the sales floor, and there's always kind of a way around. But one of the reasons why this work is really important for us is because, to the same degree that a bike or a car are available to be used similarly across state lines, and the laws are similar across state lines, we want that same parity to be applied to e-bike riders too. So to work on this, about 4 or 5 years ago, the bike industry realized that there was a lot of miscommunication and misunderstanding about what an e-bike was and wasn't. So the bike industry came together and kind of decided to self-regulate what an e-bike was within 3 classes. And they looked at what that federal definition was for an e-bike for the purpose of product sale and manufacturing. They looked at what the product was, what kind of product was being manufactured and sold here in the US already, and how it kind of classified itself based on top assisted speeds and motor wattage, and then also looked at Europe as a model. And so we came up with the 3 classes. And what this does is it really defines e-bikes within 3 classes, but also puts a a hard stop on where an e-bike stops and a motorcycle starts. So our interest is that these three classes of e-bikes are defined in state law consistently with a bicycle, and anything more high-powered or faster than that is a motorcycle and subject to different rules to the road. So class one e-bike is a pedal assist e-bike. You have to be pedaling to engage the motor, and the motor will shut off at 20 miles an hour. And in states that define this class, those bikes are generally allowed on all bike paths and on the road, obviously. Class 2 is a throttle-actuated e-bike. You can twist a throttle to engage the motor, and the motor will also shut off at 20 miles an hour. So for Class 1 and 2, that 20 number isn't an average speed. It's the top motor-assisted speed. And your average speed depends on how much cargo you're carrying, if you're going up a hill, the level of power assist you're taking advantage of, things like that. So it's really hard to put a finger on average speed, but that's one of the misconceptions out there as well, that people see that 20-mile-an-hour number and consider that to be the average speed of the bike. Back to the classes here. Class 3 is a pedal assist e-bike. Again, you have to pedal, but the maximum assisted speed is 28 miles an hour. So in states that define this, let me just scoot forward here one second. In states that define this, those states in green there, every e-bike that's sold within the classes has to be labeled with a sticker generally on the down tube or somewhere visible that states what the bike is. The states in green here are the states where we've been successful in passing our 3-class model legislation. So in other words, Class 1, 2, or 3 e-bike is defined as a bike and can generally go where a traditional bike can go. The states in yellow are states that define e-bikes as a bike, not consistently with the 3 classes, but we're working on it. And the states in red are the real problematic ones, where an e-bike is defined as a motorcycle or a moped. And because you need to register those vehicles, and you cannot register an e-bike doesn't have a VIN, you're technically riding illegally in those states. So the states in red are really priority ones for us. So we started this initiative, in 2015. And over the past 5 legislative sessions, we've been successful in defining the 3 classes of e-bikes as bikes in 22 state vehicle codes. And that's really the mechanism by which we, e-bike riders gain the same rights to the road and bike paths as traditional bike riders. Just because of the momentum, the popularity of e-bikes, more state legislators and city governments realizing that they need a clear and consistent way to define e-bikes, we've been successful at doubling our number of states with model legislation from 11 to 22 in just the past year. And the states that we were able to add to the list this year are listed right in front of you, from Georgia to Wyoming. And so one of the key takeaways here is that it's a real bipartisan issue. We don't always talk about bikes as our leading argument or conversation. We talk about how these bills help small businesses. Having a really bad e-bike law on the books will hinder sales. And obviously, as a business owner or operator, you have a tax base, you employ lots of people, you contribute to the community. You're really a storefront on Main Street that adds to the vibrancy of a community. And legislators across all spectrums of political leanings can hear that and really understand that argument. So for those of you in Wisconsin, Massachusetts, New York, and Pennsylvania, we're still working on passing e-bike laws in those states this year. And once we get to the end of the webinar, I'll share some of our 2020 priorities, and really hoping to find some champions in those states who can help us. So I want to turn it over to Patrick Collins, and I'll just reiterate that we met Patrick about a year ago, and he immediately jumped on the effort to update Wyoming state law, and without a doubt, without Patrick's help, we would not have been able to do this. So wanted to have Patrick tell his story, and it's really a great one.
Thanks, Morgan. So I've been in the bicycle industry since 1982, and these last few years, looking at e-bikes, I've been thinking that this kind of like the mountain bike would help our business be a real game changer to help our sales. And as I was reading the Bicycle Retailer, I kept reading these e-bike updates, and they would talk about all the new laws that they were getting passed. And so I wrote them and asked them how Wyoming's law was in regards to e-bikes, and the answer came back one word: problematic. The e-bikes just didn't fit our current laws, and kind of makes sense because our laws were designed a long time ago and didn't contemplate a bicycle with an electric motor. And so I asked PeopleForBikes to help us write a draft bill that we could use as a starting point for the discussion. And then I went and talked to a local senator and asked her to sponsor it. And her name was Tara Nethercott. She did a great job of being our advocate through this whole process. But I think one thing you have to do is find a legislator who has a history of being successful, of getting legislation passed, and Tara definitely had that. In Wyoming, we have only 500,000 people, so it's maybe a little bit easier for us. But I called every bike shop that I could find in Wyoming, and I talked to all the owners. And two things. One of them was that all but one of them had sold an e-bike in the preceding year. But I explained the bill to them, and I asked them to personally support the bill, specifically by reaching out to their local senators and representatives. And then I emailed them the talking points, and I gave them the contact information of each of their legislators and how to contact them and what we needed them to do. So that was, I think, a real important point to have the local support in each of their local communities. I also reached out to all of the, or some other groups, lobbying groups like the state and local chambers of commerce, the Wyoming retailers, groups like that, because I thought they were aligned to help us, but I also didn't want them to kill us if they got asked a question. And so we went to their board of directors, got them to support it, and then they came and spoke for us. Once the bill gets introduced, it's going to get assigned to a committee. And so once we had that committee, then we went to each of those 5 members on the transportation committee and had their local bike shops talk to them and explain to them how important it was to their small business. And at the meeting, we brought a bike so that they could see what it looked like, so they could realize it really does look like a bike and act like a bike. And then we also, I think one of the big things was we brought a couple of customers. One gentleman I brought, his name was Bob. Bob had lung cancer a couple of years ago, and he lost a lung. And he uses an e-bike that I sold him with a rack on the back to hold his oxygen for exercise. And then I also had a lady named Jana. She is a real MS advocate here. She has the disease, and as it's progressed, she couldn't ride anymore. And so we custom fit a bike E with an e-assist so that she could do ride bike MSs. And they really humanized the need for the e-bike and the legislation. And they said, hey, we really need to be able to ride. And I think that made a big difference. And then I think the last thing that helped was having Morgan from PeopleForBikes there, because she was able to talk about the industry and the national scene. And so months before the bill was introduced, we started talking to state parks, local officials, law enforcement, Department of Transportation. We gave them bikes to ride and demo so that they could be educated about it. And we tried to answer their concerns so that during the hearings, they would at least be neutral, support the bill. And that actually did happen. They either were very neutral or a lot of them were very supportive of it, said they were looking forward to having that. And then once we got through the committee, then we went to the Senate, and then we went to every bike shop that had a senator and had them contact their local senator. And I think that made a real difference because they got lots and lots of emails, but I think having that local business person talk to them and tell them about how it was important in their city and their business, I think really made a big difference. So it worked. We got it through the Senate, and then we got it through the House, and we got the bill signed by the governor. One thing though that we did was about 6 months before the bill was introduced, we started talking to our state parks officials about e-mountain bikes, and we lent them some e-bikes to demo for their park rangers and that type of stuff. We talked to them about what was happening across the region, like Jefferson County, Colorado, and how they'd done a year's study and found that there was no impact. And when the bill was passed, it became effective July 1st of this year. State parks actually passed rules to allow Class 1 e-mountain bikes on state trails the same day. So I think if I could give you a couple things, the key is to start making relationships with your state representatives in your local community, your state senators. I would bet you that almost every senator or representative in the state is a customer of one shop or another. We just got to find out who that is and then start that discussion with them. And then ask your vendors to help. I have giant and specialized bicycles, and both of them gave me demo bikes that we could use to lend to those groups so they could go ride them and make a difference. I think e-bikes make sense both to our businesses and to getting people to ride more bikes, and we just need to advocate for our customers and our businesses. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Patrick, and it was great working with you last year. So one thing that Patrick mentioned that I wanted to reiterate, and I mentioned this at the beginning of the call, that the work we're talking about here it isn't directly linked to electric mountain bike access, but if you pass a great or a kind of a progressive model consistent e-bike law at the state level, state parks oftentimes will follow suit. So if your state parks or your state kind of forestry agency doesn't already recognize e-bikes or doesn't have an e-bike regulation, passing a state law is a good step towards doing that on the EMTB advocacy side of things as well. So wanted to talk a little bit about the states we've identified as prospects for 2020, and then we'll also get into some of the things that PeopleForBikes can do to help and items that retailers or business owners or anyone in the industry can do to drive this as well. So our goal is to turn that map that you saw previously all green. So we want to make all 50 states adopt the same model 3-class e-bike law so that the law is the same from state to state. And the way we develop this list of the 16 states that we hope to work on in 2020 is looking at those states in red that really have a detrimental law on the books, looking at population size. If you consider states like Florida or, North Carolina, there are a number of states here that are in the top 10 or 20 most populous states in the country that still don't have a model e-bike law on the book. And we're really looking for adoption in the states that have the most customers as well, but don't want to pull any states off the table too. We passed laws in South Dakota and Oklahoma this year with relatively smaller populations, but still groups of very enthusiastic bike and e-bike riders. So also looking at existing coalitions. So where do we have a strong business voice, whether it's from the supplier side or the retail side? Where are there other groups who are interested in this, thinking about groups like Adventure Cycling Association or AARP or any kind of health groups who could really help us pass this for reasons beyond just getting more people to ride bikes, but for health and wellness issues as well. So if you see your state on this list and want to partner more, my email will be at the end, and you can always find my contact online, morgan@peopleforbikes.org. But these are states where we think we have a chance in 2020 to pass our Model 3 class bill. So how and one of the talking points that you would become versed in if you were to help with this campaign, and you heard Patrick touch on this significantly, is, if suppliers and manufacturers and retailers are faced with inconsistent and outdated e-bike laws, that's not a real great riding environment. Doesn't give a lot of confidence to e-bike riders. So want to clear that up so that, there's a place for people who buy e-bikes to ride. In the 22 states where we've seen or where we've had e-bike laws passed, we don't have hard data that show whether sales are impacted positively or negatively, but anecdotally we're able to, after conversations with retailers, we're able to learn that e-bike laws do help bike business. So in many shops in many states where e-bike laws have passed, there's just a better environment for riding it, and sales can more than double. And as you probably know, national sales trends for e-bikes in general show that sales almost double, but I think that growth is even higher in states with a good 3-class e-bike law. Bike retailers have told us that, in their state, if an e-bike law passes, it just helps their team clearly explain where an e-bike is allowed and isn't allowed on public infrastructure. And then, as we know, there are a lot of categories in the bike business that aren't doing as well as e-bikes or gravel bikes or mountain bikes, and e-bike sales can help offset the loss of those categories and the decline in those sales. So obviously e-bike riders purchase a bicycle that's generally a little bit higher in price, and a lot of times we're seeing e-bike riders, especially for road and bike path use, not have all the accessories that a traditional bike rider would have as well. So we've seen anecdotally that the accessories and the equipment that people purchase with their e-bike is significantly greater than what someone would buy with just a normal bike purchase. So how you can help. So we're obviously PeopleForBikes, we're a nonprofit, we're an industry coalition. We rely heavily on the legislators to shepherd these bills through their legislatures, but we really need that business voice to answer the question of why is this needed? And why it's needed is so that we can create a better business environment for the sale of bicycles, and that's a good thing. So if enough bike riders and retailers speak with this unified voice in support of the work that PeopleForBikes can do to support that, decision makers listen. If thousands of people ask for the same thing, then that creates a mandate for decision makers to do something about it. So let's talk a little bit about what PeopleForBikes would do in this relationship and what you as a business owner operator would do. So PeopleForBikes can write the model bill, and that's the legislation that we'd like to see that's consistent with the 3 classes. We can explain to you what the current law is in your state and how it can be improved, and just help with some of that legal analysis that not everyone, that doesn't come naturally to everyone. We can help you build coalitions and connect with legislators and advocates and retailers and manufacturers. And one of the beauties of this work is that we're really able to put competitive differences aside in order to create a better legal framework for e-bikes in your state. So that's been encouraging too, and we're just there throughout the process. We show up when we're needed, and we just help on the phone and over email it too. So what can you do? So you are the product expert. You can conduct demos. You have the demo fleets. You have the relationships within your city, your state. Conducting demos and getting people to ride an e-bike for the first time is the #1 way to dispel a lot of the myths around e-bikes. And if you've conducted demos, you know that it changes people's perceptions of e-bikes. You can tell your story, your business story, who your typical customer base is, what the demographics are, any public sales information you're willing to share with decision makers around e-bikes, just to demonstrate that this is a growing use and growing in sales. You can help find a friendly legislator. Your state legislators are wonderful. They're just a phone call away. They generally have small staffs who are willing to talk to their constituents and really improve the quality of life of their constituents and the business environment for the enterprises in their district. So it's not as intimidating as it sounds. It's actually quite fun to connect with your legislators and know who makes the decisions that impact your hometown. So we can help you find that person. A lot of times just a letter of support from a business, or even traveling to your state capitol in person to testify, goes a long way as well. And then finally, just in these states, like I said on the previous slide, if there's not a unified coalesced voice around this effort, then we're not going to be as successful. So we can just help you build that coalition of people across the board, across business interests and different organizations who all want the same thing, and that's generally an indicator of success. Talking points, I mentioned this a little bit throughout the webinar, but if you were to help with this effort, we would equip you with a lot of the talking points that cover things like where this law has passed in other states, especially in neighboring states to you, looking for consistency in e-bike laws across the country. It's been a bipartisan issue. And then to your right here, you'll see a number of the myths that we seek to dispel on a very basic level around e-bikes. But it's good to know kind of what your ask is and what your talking points are going into any meeting. Lastly, I did put together a resource recently for retailers. It's a 2-page handout, front and back, on how to use your business voice as a retailer. Anyone within the bike industry, you don't have to be a retailer, of course, to help advocate for better e-bike laws. So this is available on our website, and I'm happy to put these in an envelope and ship them off to any store or anyone in the bike business who would like copies of these for their network. So we did try to kind of institutionalize a lot of these best practices so that you can really use your voice and recognize that you have a voice as someone who works in the industry to improve the e-bike riding and sales environment. On that note, it's on to my favorite part. If you have questions for Patrick or for me, we would love to take those and have a little bit of discussion here. So the first question is from Joe. Joe asked, what about off-road? How does the class regulation relate to off-road? So what we found, and Wyoming's a perfect example of this, Idaho has done the same, and so has Texas and Colorado, actually, and a handful of other states. In states that I'll reiterate that the work that we just talked about is separate from off-road electric mountain bike access. So generally single track mountain bike trail type experiences. So if a state passes a 3-class e-bike law, that generally doesn't have any bearing on single track mountain bike access, whether it's non-motorized or motorized. But what we found, especially in Wyoming, as I said, is the state codified those 3 classes of e-bikes. So class 1, 2, and 3 e-bike is now a bicycle. And then Wyoming State Parks followed suit and says, now that there's a framework and kind of a basis for how the state is going to recognize e-bikes, we're going to use that same class system and update our park regulations. And so what they've done is they've allowed class 1 electric mountain bike use on trails where bikes are allowed in all 12 Wyoming state parks. And they're going to do a class 2 pilot project. So the more states we have that adopt the 3-class system, the more states will follow suit and use that class system as a consistent framework to update their kind of trail use regulations. So the next question is from Amy. Amy says, do green states require registration of e-bikes and or stickers on the bikes to indicate what class they are? They do not require registration. There are a couple exceptions where you're kind of encouraged to register your bike for security purposes, but those I think are relatively old laws on the books. In states that are in green, they do require the class sticker to be placed under the clear coat in a visible location on the bike. And I'll clarify that that's not, if an e-bike is riding past you, you probably can't see that sticker, but if you were to stop an e-bike and check it out, you could see the sticker. And that sticker needs to say what the class is, the top motor assisted speed, and the wattage. A question here from Rick. What's happening with the National Park Service? Rick heard that his local park is asserting that e-bikes are motor vehicles and telling bike shops that e-bikes are not allowed on any park bike trail. So the National Park Service, the U.S. Forest Service, and the Bureau of Land Management, which are the three major land holders for land managers for generally for recreation in the U.S., they all define e-bikes, regardless of class, as a motorcycle. So e-bikes are allowed where motorcycles are allowed. Still a lot of places, a lot of double track dirt roads, some single track. I do know that those agencies are considering updates to their policies, but we don't have any indication when that'll be finished or what it will say. But hopefully within the next year or so, those policies will be updated. Another question here from Henry, kind of similar to what we talked about prior. So what's happening on a national level for e-bikes and at the U.S. Forest Service? So again, if it's a non-motorized trail on Forest Service, BLM, or Park Service property, then it generally does not allow e-bikes. There are a couple exceptions. The Tahoe National Forest does allow Class 1 EMTBs on about 217 miles of non-motorized trails within their inventory, and they're doing that as a pilot experiment. So that's very encouraging. The Forest Service is looking at experiments to allow, potentially consider allowing more e-bikes in more places, but that's just a pilot at this point. Next question from Maureen. What is your advice to advocate for rebates and incentives from which offer finances to buy electric cars? So Maureen, it sounds like you're from California. So that's actually the best example. So this kind of goes back to purchase incentives for the purchase of e-bikes. And there is a bill in the California State Legislature that's looking to take a little bit of the money that is for, their Cash for Clunkers program. So you would turn in your old gas-powered motor combustion vehicle, and you would get a clean electric vehicle in its place. And AB 400 is looking at allocating some of that funding towards the purchase of an electric bicycle or the usage of e-bike share. That bill is still in the legislature. It might or might not pass. That's up to the legislators, but I would recommend looking at existing funding sources or tax bases and trying to authorize some of that money for the purchase of e-bikes. We're not in a particularly friendly climate in most state legislatures to create new taxes or new purchase incentive programs, but there are some good examples out there of purchase programs. Question from Rich here. The New York legislature passed the Almost Model Bill. They allow individual towns and counties to opt out of allowing e-bikes. How do we fix this? Great question, Rich. We're very much in the weeds with the governor's office to fix many provisions of that New York bill so that there's an opt-out for Class 1 and Class 2 in New York State and not an opt-in. So hopefully we'll have more information on that in the future. Ray here asks, would it ever make sense to advocate for a change in federal law rather than focus on the state level? So federal law defines what you can sell and states define what you can ride. So I think both efforts go hand in hand. What we're hoping is that once we have all 50 states adopting the 3-class model legislation, then we can go back to the federal government and amend some of this Consumer Product Safety Commission regulation around electric bicycles so that they, instead of kind of an outdated definition of e-bikes, that they recognize the 3 classes. Doug asked, what messaging about personal responsibility is PeopleForBikes giving out? So in terms of speed limits, use on rail trails, we give out a lot. This is a question I think about trail etiquette, and obviously that is a personal responsibility issue. We always advocate for people to follow posted or statutory speed limits and to respect the rules of the bike path or the road where they're traveling, just as a vehicle or a bike would. So we certainly advocate for anyone riding an e-bike, whether they're an existing cyclist or really haven't been through a leg over a bike since they got their driver's license, to be respectful on the road and bike paths. Another question from Doug here: what data or plans to get data from e-bike usage and bike tourism rentals of e-bikes or for multi-day tours exist? So we are trying to track bicycle tourism numbers, and I think a good source of information for this would be from bicycle tour operators who've been incorporating e-bikes into their fleets and offering kind of multi-generation bike rides, either whether they're kind of day tours or multi-day tours. So we don't have hard data on that yet, but we're looking at expanding that as well.
So thanks for all those great questions, everyone, and your participation today. We want to take a second to thank all of our coalition members here at People for Bikes. We couldn't do the great work that we do without their support. So if you're interested in becoming a coalition member, visit us at PeopleForBikes.org. You can shoot me a message at ericb@PeopleForBikes.org as well, and we will get you set up with that membership. That'll do it for us today. I want to thank you all again for participating in our e-bike webinar, and be on the lookout for next month's. Thanks very much.